It was brought to my attention by people who know me that during my first couple of podcasts that I was slightly stiff, and it's probably true. So I was told that I need to explain things more. And these are people that have seen me teach, so they have an understanding of how I actually teach and how I actually explain things. And my response was, but I've been teaching that stuff for decades. Like I could teach that in my sleep. Whereas this stuff is information that I do know some about, but I go into more deep dives. So it's not information that's as familiar to me. And the response was, yeah, figure it out. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to figure it out. I apologize if it's not quite as polished, but I guess you're going to see a little bit more of me today. So enjoy. Welcome to Down the Dopamine Hole, where random subjects are forced to hold hands until they get along and then tied together with a psychological concept. I am Dr. Amy Gertine. You can call me Amy. Pretty much everybody does. It's one of the better things that I've actually been called since I have worked with clients for like 3 decades. Oh, being a fan of sports, music, that's always been considered normal. Everybody's done it. Cool. Being a fan of anything else, however, traditionally has kind of made you a nerd. Trust me, I know because I was a nerd long before it was cool. I mean, I'm talking like Star Trek in the early 90s. And yes, I know there's people that are like, well, I was a fan of Star Trek in the 60s. Cool for you. I wasn't born in the 60s. So I didn't really get into Star Trek until like next gen. So, but yes, super nerd. I mean, I watched the show, I read the books, I even went to conventions. Like, that's how much of a nerd we're talking about.
The U.S.
Engage. Engage.
Now, though, being a nerd is kind of like a badge of honor, something to be proud of, at least most of the time. At one point, action figures, they were for kids, they were toys, they were something that you played with. But then adults started buying them and they started collecting them. And as soon as adults started collecting things, everything changed. And fan merch became huge business. The sports world had figured that out a really long time ago. Fan merch, jerseys, sports paraphernalia, they've been selling that stuff for a long time. But all of a sudden, the rest of the fan world figured out that fan merch was huge and they could make a lot of money off of it. A lot more money from adults than they could from kids. So now everyone did it and everyone was making money. We're talking manga, we're talking TV shows, superhero movies, singers, video games, fictional characters from books, like you name it, and people were selling merch. So we had t-shirts and we had action figures and we had stuffed animals and we had collectibles and keychains and pins and conventions. We had pretty much every kind of self-expression that you could imagine. And self-expression, that's pretty empowering, mostly. Some problems with that. We'll get to that in a minute. We started developing fandoms, and fans already existed, but fandoms became these really large groups of people who were all fans of the same thing. And that became pretty cool because we could go and we could find other people that loved the same things that we did. And merchandising helped that because we could go find somebody that had a t-shirt of this love that we had, or we could find people that had keychains hanging off of purses or backpacks or whatever. And we could go, oh, you like that too. And we could find our people. But then it also made it easier for people to find targets. Oh, you like this thing? And then they would make a negative comment. So fandom, very cool. Very awesome for self-expression. Not so awesome if somebody wanted to find a target for bullying. And we know that people are people. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that have bad traits. And one of those traits is that need to feel better than other people. They need to feel superior to other people. And they want their things to be superior to other people. And there are some people that are just jerks and they want to find something to be jerks about. Then came the internet and fandoms just exploded. But along with fandoms became superfans. And superfans are groups of fans that are fanatics. They're excessively loyal. They're very enthusiastic. They're very dedicated. Unfortunately, remember I said that there's some people that are just kind of jerks? Well, some of those super fans are those people. And what they would do is they would troll online for fans of things that are not fans of what they are. And they would bully them horribly, sometimes really horribly. Something else interesting that they did is they didn't just troll online for people that were fans of things that they weren't fans of. Sometimes they actually trolled online for people that were fans of the same things that they were fans of, but for people that they didn't see as being as big of fans as they were. So if you've ever seen somebody who was wearing a band t-shirt, for example, and you heard somebody else say something like, I bet that they don't even know more than 2 songs that they sing. Like all of a sudden, it's almost like you had to prove that you were a fan of this thing. Like being a fan was like an audition, or it was like a club initiation. And it almost became, now it's not just, oh, these bullies are going to bully people that are outside of their fandom. Now they can bully people that are inside of their fandom too. And everybody became free game for bullying. And that to me is kind of weird. But yet, when you think about it from a psychological perspective, people want to be a part of a very small, inclusive group because that is a way of making them feel superior. It's a way of making them feel better than. It's a way of making them feel part of a very small, inclusive group, which is way cooler than being a part of a group that contains millions, because that doesn't make you feel special. What they have to do then is they have to figure out how to take a group of millions of people and they have to figure out how to make it smaller. And one of the ways to do that is to figure out, how do we get rid of the people who aren't real fans or who aren't big enough fans? And that's how we make our group smaller. So that's where a lot of this bullying comes in. There's 8.3 billion people in the world. It's kind of hard to be part of like a small inclusive group. And so it takes a little extra effort to do that. Basically, you got to kick people out of it. You got to do the whole my group is better than your group. Fandom and bullying have become much more prevalent, and at least partly for these reasons. We have known for a long time, due to research, the effects of bullying. There's a lot of psychological issues. There's higher levels of depression, higher levels of anxiety, more PTSD, more behavior problems. There's also a lot of social effects. So not only are people who are bullied, not only do they get isolated by their peers, but they also tend to isolate from their peers, sometimes their own friends. Sometimes they develop social anxiety. They develop lower self-esteem. They have a lack of trust in other people. And cyberbullying is even worse, because cyberbullying kind of shows people that they're not safe anywhere. They're not even safe in their own home. What happens then when people are cyberbullied, they can actually withdraw from social media or other online platforms. And the effect of that is that they can't even go online to try to find that support online. So if they've been isolated by their peers, or if they've withdrawn from their peers, like face-to-face peers, a lot of them won't even go online to go find support elsewhere. And that can be really damaging, because what needs to happen with people that have been bullied is they need to take back the psychological control that's been taken from them. They need to earn back their strength. They need to earn back trust, safety, self-esteem, those types of things. And a lot of times Online groups or online support can help do that. For some people, people who, for example, are neurodivergent, like people who are autistic, people who are ADHD, people who had social anxiety before the bullying, this can be especially difficult because there's social skills issues. So trying to find that support system can be even more difficult. But one of the advantages of the internet, if you can get past staying off of it or being afraid to go back online, is that you can find your people. If you have kind of those interests that aren't shared by a lot of people, or say you live in a smaller town or you go to a smaller school, being able to find your people online is a lot easier sometimes than being able to find your people in real life. Finding your people can help you to negate some of those negative effects of bullying. So online can be a great thing. I do want to point out that there are so many nuances to this next subject that I realize no matter how much research that I do, I'm going to get information wrong. There's no way that I can understand this next subject because it talks about an entire community of people I don't belong to. I really want to do this subject complete justice, but I know that I can't. So I know that there is no way that I'm going to be able to get all of the information correct. And I'm going to apologize in advance for that. And this is one of the reasons why I'm not doing a complete deep dive into this next subject, but I'm trying to keep it a little bit of surface information. But I also want to try to fight or argue some of the negative connotations that this group has. One of the things that I want to talk about is furries, and it has a huge fandom. And one of the reasons that I want to talk about this is because it is a community that is so accepting and so non judgmental. And it has a very, very large percentage of people that have been bullied. And this has been a community that has helped people in so many ways to overcome a lot of those really negative effects of bullying. I did talk to someone who is from the furry community. I really wanted to do an interview, but they ultimately decided that they wanted to maintain their confidentiality from friends and family, and I completely respected that. So I did get some basic information. I did run some information by them. Again, if there's anything that I get wrong, I really want you guys to put comments below to let me know if there's anything that I get incorrect, and I do want other people to have the correct information. Let me get into a little bit of basic information. Furries as a whole create an anthropomorphized character for themselves with whom they identify. So, for those of you that don't like big words, anthropomorphized just means making something more human like. It's kind of like the word anthropomorphized, not furries. It's kind of like when a kid says that their stuffed animal is alive. That's anthropomorphizing. A furry character, they call it a fursona or a sona, and it includes the way that they dress and very often an avatar that they use online. I do want to point out something. Furries are different than what are called therians. Therians believe that they are not entirely human. They are in some part animal, or they contain the spirit of an animal, or something like that. This is not a furry belief. They don't believe that they are their fursona. They don't believe that they are an animal. There is a difference between the two. A lot of people put down furries because they don't understand. They put down a lot of things that they don't understand because that's kind of how people are. But a lot of people don't understand rocket science either. But I don't really see people putting down rocket scientists and telling them that they're not psychologically healthy. So just keep that in mind. Some furries wear full fursuits. Others have partial fursuits. And if you have a partial fursuit, generally it's like the head and the paws. Most fursuits are handmade by the actual person themselves, because a lot of people in the furry community are extremely creative. However, some people have their fursuits handmade by other people because they need it to be made a specific way in order to represent their fursona because it already has a specific look and they need it to be made for that specific look. Fursuits can cost several $1,000s. It's difficult to get really specific statistics about furries. And I kind of want to explain why. When research is done, a lot of it depends on how the question is asked. And that's going to kind of determine the statistic that you get. And this is true of all research. I'm going to give you an example. If you ask the gender identity, some research may give the options of male, female, and other. So you're going to get pretty limited statistics from that. Some research is going to say male, female, and then a category like trans/gender fluid/gender neutral, and then maybe other. Okay, you might get a little bit more information from that, but it's still going to be slightly limited. Then you're going to get other research that's going to offer cis male, cis female, trans female, gender fluid, gender neutral, or other. You're going to get more information from that. The problem with all of this, though, is then how do you take all of that information from all of that research and how do you combine all of that? Do you combine cis male and trans male into male? It's very difficult to then get really accurate statistics because not every research study has asked for gender in the same way. I'm going to give you some statistics, but they're going to be ranges. And the ranges are because it has to do with how the research actually asked for the information. So I just want to let you know that. About 75% of furries are under the age of 25. 60 to 80% are male, 15% are female, and between 5 and 15% are either transgender, gender neutral, or gender fluid. In the general population, for example, okay, about 3% of the population under 25 is transgender, gender neutral, or gender fluid, as opposed to the 5 to 15% in the furry community. Just over 80% are white. We know that that's not accurate in terms of like in comparison to the general population. 62% of furries report being bullied in school, as opposed to 39% of the general population. So huge number were bullied. When seeking therapy, this is just a really interesting point. When seeking therapy for any psychological issue, a lot of furries actually reported that they ended up leaving therapy because the therapist would not focus on the issues that they went into therapy for, but wanted to focus on the fact that they were a furry. And as a therapist, I find that awful. Absolutely awful. Because psychology has found that being a furry has no negative psychological aspects whatsoever. But I don't know, being depressed does, being anxious does. So the fact that a therapist would want to focus on something that has shown to have no negative psychological effects, but would want to not focus on the actual things that do have negative psychological effects, for me as a therapist, that kind of infuriates me. Because it means that people who are actually asking for help are not getting help. The majority are LGBTQ+. I'm going to give this to you in terms of most to least. The majority are gay or bisexual. It's between about 15 to 25% each. So you're talking 30 to 50% are gay or bisexual. And then in terms of amount, followed by pansexual, heterosexual, and asexual. It's very interesting to note that those in the furry community actually overestimate the number of LGBTQ plus in the community. So they actually think that there's more than what actually is. Another interesting research finding is that engagement in the furry community tends to result in higher self-esteem and life satisfaction. Again, not exactly, these weird people who think badly of themselves. Despite a lot of furries having higher rates of bullying, unstable family environments, and social stressors, there are no significant differences in psychological well-being, self-esteem, or relationship satisfaction from non-furry control groups. And in fact, and this is really important, furries tend to show a better developed and more coherent sense of identity than non-furry control groups. Furries tend to feel a sense of belongingness, a sense of recreation, and an escape from everyday life, just kind of like what the rest of us have from being a fan of something. They tend to have more active fantasy lives, but they actually use those fantasy lives for really productive purposes like creativity. There's a lot of creativity in the furry community, social interaction, and recreation. None of the research that I read talked about weird sexual practices. And that's one of the things that a lot of people who don't understand the furry community tend to talk about. It's a very, very welcoming, non judgmental community that offers safety and acceptance without a fear of rejection. And being a part of the furry community, it allows for experimentation of a different role. It allows for people to explore social interactions, their sexuality in terms of sexual identity, their gender identity, and their creativity. It gives confidence that they may not have otherwise because they're interacting as their persona, which kind of allows them to interact as their idealized version of themselves, if you think about it. And fursuits can provide anonymity. And we all know that when we have anonymity, we tend to be a little bit braver, a little bit more confident. When you look at all of this, it's kind of easy to see why people would actually be drawn to this community and this way of life. It's pretty positive, and it has some really good outcomes. All right, let's switch topics a little. So there have been a couple psychologists, actually a lot, but the kind of leading psychologists, who talked about identity development in adolescence and in early adulthood, since that's generally when the majority of our identity development happens. Eric Erickson is the first one, and yes, his parents actually named him that, which, I mean, honestly, is kind of an awesome name. And James Marsha. One of the things that is very similar about their theories is that both of them talked about the need to explore different identities before actually developing very stable, very cohesive identities. And that is really necessary because if you don't go try on different identities and if you don't go try different things, you can't figure out who you are. And this is why as teenagers and young adults, we try different roles, we listen to different music, we dress different ways, we get different friend groups. This is all important for us figuring out who we are. And along with this, kind of goes back to what we were talking about being a fan of things. It kind of helps us to form our identity. So, a stable and cohesive identity, it allows us to live according to our identity. And it allows us to be true to ourselves and to other people. So, it allows us to live according to who we are, according to our morals. It allows us to be very, very loyal to other people. And that's really important. When people don't develop a stable identity, there's kind of some problems there. And one of them is that we consistently tend to change our lives trying to figure out who we are. People will change jobs repeatedly or frequently. They will change relationships. They will move. They will change hobbies. They're basically continually trying to find themselves. Another thing that they talked about, if you don't kind of have that identity exploration, some people, again, will kind of never find their identity, but some people, what happens is they take on the identity that is like expected of them or that's kind of put on them. And very frequently, this happens from either parents or society. Parents say, well, this is who you're supposed to be. And they go, okay. And then they just accept that. And what happens when that outcome occurs is they pretty much end up really unhappy. Like, for a long time. So I wouldn't do that if I were you. It's kind of what that comes down to. Psychology does understand that being engaged in furry fandom is one way of helping people explore and develop their identity. Again, not a bad thing. It's not a negative behavior. It's not deviant behavior. It's just a part of natural human development. It's so positive, actually, that many people remain in the furry world even after they've developed a stable identity because it's part of a positive identity. Let's go back to fandom and why it's important in identity. Like with furries, fandom helps provide a part of our identity. If I say that I'm a Trekkie, and we know that I am, it helps me to partially define who I am. The problem with fandom and identity is that it's really carefully cultivated by those who are outside of the fan groups for one really important purpose, and that's profit. Basically, companies make money off of fans. We know this. We talked about merch, we talked about how much we buy merch, and that's really important for companies. But there's one thing you have to keep in mind. Being a fan doesn't make up our entire identity, and companies know that. And the companies really trying to get us to spend money on our fans and our fandom, and the companies trying to kind of manipulate us to get us to spend that money. It's called consumer culture, by the way. So they do things like conventions, get-togethers, sporting events, competitions, all that kind of stuff. This is really great because we are with like-minded people. And when we get together with like-minded people, it tends to strengthen our identity. It also tends to get us to spend a lot of money, which, hey, win-win. But like I said, the problem is that our fandom does not create our entire identity. So what happens when your favorite TV show is canceled? What happens when your sports team is having a bad year? If your favorite TV show is canceled, sometimes people just move on and watch another TV show. When your sports team is having a bad year, people don't buy as many tickets. They don't go to as many games. And consumer culture understands this. So they try to figure out ways to kind of help you buy more merchandise, or to try to keep you involved, to try to keep you going to those games, to try to, if it's a TV show that's canceled, that network is going to try to put another TV show in there that's going to get you to stay with the network. And they know how to do that. One of the ways that they kind of tend to increase someone's sense of identity is to threaten it. We know that if our sense of identity is threatened, then we tend to kind of double down on our sense of identity. And a really good example of this was 9/11. The day after 9/11, Walmart alone, just Walmart, sold 116,000 American flags. The year before, they sold 6,400. In the first few days after 9/11, Walmart and Kmart alone, you guys remember Kmart? If you do, you're like old. Anyway, Walmart and Kmart alone, just those two stores, sold 650,000 flags. Flag sales were so high after 9/11 that we couldn't even keep up with the production. And if you guys don't understand the irony of what I'm going to say, we actually had to import American flags from other countries just to keep up with the demand. Our identity as Americans were threatened. So what happened was we responded by having an increase in our identity, and we responded by spending money to strengthen our identity. And this behavior has been known by companies for decades. People tend to be threatened by change because change threatens our identity. People will go to great lengths to maintain the consistency of our self-concept and our identity. And anything that threatens that consistency will make people so resistant to change, it's unbelievable. Men tend to be threatened by women gamers because it threatens traditional gaming, but it also threatens traditional male gender roles. Fans of singers get threatened by new up-and-coming singers because it threatens their identity as being the fan of a top performer. This can lead to more spending and more bullying of the new singer and the new singer's fans. Do you guys remember Gillette's commercial that basically just asked men to be decent human beings? That's all it asked. And men had a fit. Men boycotted Gillette. How dare you ask me to be a psychologically and emotionally healthier person for my wife and my child. It went against traditional gender roles. How do people react when someone of a different race is cast into a superhero role? Yeah, that doesn't always go over so well. People act like the world has been flipped upside down, but that's not who they are, okay? That's not who they are because a lot of comics started to be written 100 years ago when racism was the norm. But some of us can understand that a superhero isn't just the way that they were drawn, it's an idea. And the color of somebody's skin doesn't change an idea. But not everybody understands that. But sorry, I forgot we were talking about change being threatened by one's identity. Toxic masculinity, for example, is consumer culture. And if you don't believe me, go find out how many of the red pill guys, go find out how much they're making on social media and tell me that it's not consumer culture, because it is. When our identity is threatened, we strike out as a way of protecting our identity. And it's human nature. It just is, at least for some. Our desire to hold on to the consistency of our identity is another reason why people have problems with things like, I belong to a political party, so I have to support this political person, even if they're an immoral person. And that is due to a desire for consistency in our identity. So if you belong to a political party and there's an immoral person, and if you don't support them, it causes a conflict. It causes that inconsistency in identity. And a lot of people can't do that. So they justify their support of the immoral person. But that's all I'm going to say on that one. You need to keep in mind that you are being manipulated to like certain things, and you are being manipulated to resist any change in liking those things. You have to keep in mind that we have a natural tendency to think that our group is better than other groups. And we have a natural tendency then to see other groups as threats. You have to keep in mind that other groups are not threats. Even if certain members of those other groups are acting like jerks. There's nothing wrong with female gamers. There's nothing wrong with Black superheroes. There's nothing wrong with a Doctor who's a woman. There's nothing wrong with a new singer or a new actor or someone that has talent. There's nothing wrong with asking you to change your behavior, because we learn that different behavior is not only healthier for you, but it's healthier for the people around you. There's nothing wrong with asking for change. Change can make other people feel seen. Change is representation. It allows other people to see themselves in things, sometimes for the first time. And it allows them to understand that they can have the success that other people can have. And if you don't want representation, or if you don't want change for the better, I am very, very sorry for you, because it means that you're a really unhealthy person and you have a really unhealthy identity. I have worked with people for decades, literally decades. And the most happy, healthy people that I have worked with are the people that see the best in other people and that want to see other people do their best. Like the saying goes, pay attention to the people who don't clap when you win. And if you're one of those people that isn't clapping, that's a part of your identity. And again, I feel sorry for you, because you're not going to be one of the happiest and healthiest people out there. But for those of you who are clapping, good for you. Honestly, good for you. Go out and enjoy your life and enjoy your identity, because you have figured out a secret that not everyone has figured out. And I, for one, applaud you. And that's all that I have for today. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me. My goal is to put out content every Sunday. If you like what you saw or listened to, please subscribe so that you can be notified when new content comes out. As usual, all the research for this podcast is below, or it can be found on the corresponding website, downthedopaminehole.com. I hope you learned something new and enjoyed your time down the dopamine hole. Be safe, take care of yourself, but most importantly, keep it weird.